I notice that we so often lose our way spiritually, and that when we do, we're not the happiest human beings to be around. On the one hand, we generate lofty expectations for our lives that are not always rooted in reality, but rather rooted in our overestimation of ourselves or our circumstances, coupled to what we think we deserve in our pride. And then when we experience reality, when our expectations are not met, a great disillusionment and disappointment sets in, and more often than not, we get angry because we feel we've been cheated, shortchanged, we deserved more. Now, my point today will be this: that disillusionment, that disappointment, and that anger for that disillusionment and disappointment are, generally speaking, a very good thing, because it is the place from where you may find connection with God again after being lost due to unhealthy expectations. It is the place where you find the truth again and value what is really important. It is the place where you find what you were really looking for in the first place. But let me give you 4 examples to illustrate my point, and then I will close. My first example to explain these expectations and then the following disillusionment is when you start a new job. When we start a new job, we have lofty expectations, don't we? We quietly think that we will enjoy working at the new working place, that we're going to grow, that everyone is going to like us, that we will be recognized for our wonderful contribution to the success of the business. We believe that there'll be no strife, and we idolize ourselves in our expectations. But the reality is, more often than not, long hours, strife with fellow employees, and being taken for granted. The reality is daily grind, in and out daily, to the workplace, back, weekends, and more. And for some, even dismissal. Yet this disillusionment with these expectations is such a gift, because when that happens, we realize that it's only God that can give us the things we sought in the workplace in the first place. It's only God who can give us satisfaction and security and peace. And I've seen over and over again in practice that this disillusionment sets the tone for God to work in a new way, in a profound way. And I've seen this most importantly when there are people who have been dismissed, that God works in new ways. My second example is marriage. When we get married, we expect happiness and maybe even bliss. We expect a home with a picket fence and athletic and intelligent and easygoing children. We expect our spouse to give us endless intimacy, and that we are going to have pina coladas and we're going to be caught in the rain. However, nobody expects arguments and isolation and fights. Nobody expects long periods of disconnect. Nobody expects complicated children. No one expects financial strain on the marriage that sucks the life out of it. Nobody expects that this relationship will require a very high cost if it is to work. From unrealistic, lofty expectations to great disillusionment is the path of almost every marriage. Yet it is this disillusionment that sets the tone for God to work in marriage. It is this disillusionment which makes us turn to God for the very first time, in essence, away from self and pride, to humility and reliance on God to save our marriage and to make it fulfilling for His glory. My third example is a scene in the television series The Crown. The Queen's husband is going through something like a midlife crisis, and he is taken with the moon landing which had just happened in the story. But His faith is affected negatively because he's blown away by the human accomplishment of landing on the moon, but less by the God who made the moon. And so he idolizes the astronauts. He wants to be like them because he sees in them an out to his meaninglessness, to his fear, to his struggle with the fact that his life is coming to an end and he feels he's achieved nothing. So he looks to these astronauts as an out. But then, being the Queen's husband, he has the opportunity to meet the astronauts. And when he meets with them, they are simply young men who are like children, teenagers. His expectation of hearing from them stories of great accomplishment, great godlike accomplishment, is met with men who are more interested in jokes and what happened with the water cooler. And so a great disillusionment sets in on him because they're not the men who have reached the unattainable. They are boys who have achieved the attainable. They provide him no hope in his loss of meaning in his midlife crisis. He will have to look higher. They obscured the view, but they're gone now. And the only one left higher than him to see is the God who made the very moon upon which these teenager men landed. His expectations had obscured his view of God, and his disillusionment had made him see God again. And that's why I say it's a good thing, because this disillusionment sets the tone for God to work again in his life. My last example is the most important one from the Bible. In our text today, we have a man who was disillusioned, Naaman. And you need to note he was a great man, a victorious man of valor, but strangely, to counterbalance that, he had leprosy. And so Naaman comes to Israel for healing. And because he is a great man, he has expectations to be treated like one, even by God and prophet. He expects the prophet Elisha to come out in person to greet him, and that Elisha will call upon God and wave his hand over him and heal him. He has expectations, Naaman, for a great and public miracle healing befitting a great and victorious man of valor himself. So even in his illness, I guess that's ironic, his expectations for God and prophet are rooted in his pride. Yet the prophet Elisha does not come out to greet him, and by God's design there is no waving and great public healing. Instead, the prophet sends his messenger and tells Naaman to go wash 7 times in the Jordan River. That means taking off his clothes and going into the waters of a foreign country. Remember, he's a Syrian. He's not a Jew. And so, to be healed, a great humbling is required. A great disillusionment is necessary. And so Naaman is very angry, and he turns away and he goes off in a rage because his expectations have not been met by God and prophet. His expectations, which are deeply rooted in what he thinks will work for him and what befits him. There is a deep disillusionment and disappointment. But it is also the stage for God to work on his own terms, because Naaman's servants come to him and convince him. And he finds within himself the humility to accept the terms set by God. And he washes himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and he's healed of his leprosy. And for the first time in his life, he recognizes the true God of all. The disillusionment, the disappointment had set the tone for reality, and had set the tone for God to take control. Disillusionment, I tell you, is in that sense a great joy, because it brings me closer to the only one who can truly bless me. I close. Jesus Christ ensured that his expectations were aligned with the will of God. What was expected of him was not fair in human terms. It was a cross, it was suffering, it was death, it was rejection. Can you imagine if Christ had other expectations, how disillusioned and disappointed he would have been, but he made sure that he was aligned and that these things were on his path. Despite his innocence, he had made peace with that. And so Christ had the profound humility necessary for that, a humility which is obedient even to death. And because of that, he was not surprised in his life, nor was he disillusioned in his life. Yet for us there is disillusionment, because we build expectations from our pride that are way outside the will of God. And we build expectations, listen to this, is important, that do not include struggling, suffering, and death, which are the hallmark of those who follow Christ. What I'm saying is, if you're truly following Christ, you will have expectations that include struggling, suffering, and death. Humility must be the foundation of every expectation. In the workplace, I must place others first, and I must work as if I work for the Lord, not for myself, not for my recognition, for His glory. And only on this deep path of humility in the workplace will I find true and lasting and balanced satisfaction. In my marriage, I must be a servant to my spouse. Read the texts. Marriage is the ultimate institution of selflessness. Ultimate institution. My expectations for my marriage must be founded in the humility of selflessness. In my midlife crisis, I must remember that neither I nor any man can fill the extreme emptiness and fear I feel at the realization of the brevity of my life, that it's almost over, and that I've accomplished nothing. I must embrace the unimportance of my life and the importance of God. It's that humility that will bring meaning in the midst of my midlife crisis. It is disillusionment that prepares your heart to meet with God again. It is disillusionment that makes you humble again. It is disillusionment that makes you value what is truly important. And what is truly important is this: a simple and unobtrusive life, walked humbly with God right to the end. May God bless you so. Amen.